Hey, what's up, Ripple Effect? My name is Brett. I am the student ministry pastor here at the Wilmington campus for Port City Community Church, and I am so excited that you're here tonight for your community group. Wanted to let you know about a couple of things that are going to be coming up. First and foremost, next weekend is the pumpkin hunt. Now, if you're an upperclassman, you know all about pumpkin hunt, and I don't need to convince you to be there. If you are a freshman, you need to be at Port City Community Church next week right here in Studio 3 at 6:30 to be a part of the pumpkin hunt, because it is one of the best events we do for our students. Basically, it looks like you hopping in the car with all your friends and your small group leader, driving all over Wilmington, figuring out clues and finding a pumpkin. For what? Well, for glory, and for being able to rub it in your friends' faces that you won the Pumpkin Hunt 2016. So make sure you are here in Studio 3 next week at 6:30 to participate in the Pumpkin Hunt. Also, make sure that you are signing up for the ski trip. The ski trip is going to be in January, but you need to sign up now. Get your deposit in and fill out your paperwork and do all of that on the website that's listed right down here. So go to this website and get all the information you need about the ski trip, and also sign up, because we need you signed up now so you can lock your spot in, because we don't have a lot of spots. So make sure you get signed up for the ski trip. Also want to make sure that you are following us on Instagram. The handle is right down here as well. We'll put it right down here. Just search for Ripple Effect, PC3 Ripple Effect, and make sure that you are following us so you can stay up to date on any changes that are happening, anything that is coming up, that you can get all the information you need by following us on Instagram. So we will see you next week right here in Studio 3 at 6:30 for the Pumpkin Hunt. See you then.
What's up, Ripple Effect? My name is Jeffrey Banks, and if you were here last week, you know we started a series called Squad, where we were talking about what community looks like with our friends. And this week, we're actually going to be talking about something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about what community looks like with the people who are outside of our squad, with people that we might call enemies. I know it might seem a little extreme, but if we're being real, we all kind of have them. We all kind of have the people, maybe we don't call them enemies, but we all kind of have the people that that we can't really stand to be around, or that maybe we're uncomfortable, or we're going to a party or something like that and we hear they're going to be there and we're like, oh, seriously, so-and-so is going to be there? We all kind of have those people, right? I know that for me, it was this guy named Zach. And Zach was this guy that I went to high school with, and he kind of ran in the same circle of friends that I did. And I remember this one time, I had this big crush on this girl, and I really wanted to hang out with her, and Zach kind of knew her family, and he went around saying all this stuff about me that wasn't true. And it made me so mad, because whenever I tried to point out that, hey, dude, that's not true, no one believed me, because everybody liked Zach. And from that point forward, he became like my mortal enemy. Like, I couldn't stand to be around him. If I knew he was going to be somewhere, I didn't want to be where he was at, and it just always made me uncomfortable. So maybe at the time I didn't call him my enemy, but if you would have asked me if I liked him, I definitely would have said no. So maybe we don't always call them our enemies, but we all have kind of people that we like and people that we don't like. We have people who are in our squad and people who are outside of it. So again, last week we talked about kind of the people who are in it, the people that we hang out with, and how whenever it came to Jesus's squad, right, if you want to call it that, he did things differently. The way Jesus acted in culture and around his friends was different from what you might expect, and definitely different from what the culture expected at the time. So this time we're going to look at kind of how Jesus was with his enemies, and how the way he acted was completely different from what you'd expect, and completely different from what we might do with ours. So in Jesus' time, it was definitely a lot easier to tell who your enemy was. Like, if I say we're doing a series on enemies, you probably don't have a person that immediately pops into your head. I mean, maybe you do, but probably not. That immediately pops into your head and you go, oh, that's my enemy, or that's the person that I really don't like. But for Jesus' time, right, whenever we go back and read the Bible, it's really obvious. At the time, Jesus was a Jew, right? And they were under Roman rule. And they were basically, the Jewish people to Romans were a little bit higher than slaves. They weren't even really looked at as people. So it was easy for Jesus and for everybody in that time to say, Roman government is enemy number one. It was obvious. Also, the Jews kind of considered themselves set apart by God. They considered themselves to be chosen people. So they looked at people who weren't Jews as kind of like outsiders and kind of as people who weren't really in society like they were. They didn't really associate with people who were outside of their squad. They didn't associate with people who weren't Jewish. It just wasn't part of the culture then. Also, there was even a ranking inside of their squad. Like there were certain people in Judaism that were kind of considered higher up than other people. So you had the Pharisees, and then you just kind of had the people who didn't really keep the law. So there are even rankings and enemies, if you will, inside of their own group. So back then it was a lot easier for them to say this person's my enemy, because there was their whole world, their whole culture was based on who was in and who was out. It was a really obvious thing for them. So today it might seem a little more complicated. We might not be able to really look at our group of friends or at the people that we see at school and say this person's in and this person's out. Hopefully you can't. I mean, maybe you can, but there's some questions that you can ask about to kind of figure out who that person is. And kind of whenever I think about it, I think about like, is there any person that I say all the time, I really can't stand insert name here, right? I really can't stand this person. I really can't stand that person. I can't stand to be around them. I can't stand the way they act, right? And we do this for all sorts of reasons. Like if I was to sit down and ask you why you don't like so-and-so, you could probably build a pretty solid case of why you don't like them and why you shouldn't like them. Or maybe not. Maybe it was one of those things where you overreacted or you just get a bad feeling from them or whatever. But that's definitely one of the ways where we add people to the group that we don't like. Another way that we can tell is like, and this kind of funny one, is there anyone that you have like fake arguments with in your head? I know I do this all the time. Like I'll get in an argument with someone, and then whenever I walk away, like 5 minutes later, I'm like, oh, I should have said that, right? And you come up with like the best comeback ever, and you try to text it to them, and it just doesn't work out, right? But is there anyone that you do that with in your head all the time? Or maybe you have to do a group project with them or ask them a question or something like that, and you have this dreaded, oh, if I say this, they're just going to do this. Or if I do that, they're just going to do this. And we automatically kind of jump to those conclusions in our head. I know it's really easy to do that as well. And the other question I ask myself is like, is there anybody I'd really love to see fail? And I know that sounds kind of extreme, so I'll try to dial it back a little bit. But do you guys know that person who seems like they're always amazingly successful and is just great at everything they do, but you know that they're not really as good as they say they are? That's who that Zach guy was for me whenever I was in high school. He was this guy who everybody thought was so great, but I knew for sure he was not as good as everybody thought he was. And I spent so much time just waiting for his downfall. Just waiting until like the truth was exposed about him. People could see him who for who he really was, or that he would get really embarrassed in front of the whole school, or whatever would happen. We all kind of have those people, right? Or maybe it's just me, I don't know. But we all have those people that we're waiting to see kind of fail, or waiting to see, maybe not fail, but get embarrassed, or for everybody to kind of see the truth about them. Because we can really make enemies, we can really make people that we don't like in the blink of an eye. And I'm not gonna, this isn't like some crazy message where I'm gonna tell you, oh, you have to love your enemies and you should like everybody and you should love everybody. Because the truth is that you don't have to like everybody. You don't have to treat everybody like they're your best buddy, right? And it's not expected, right? No one likes everyone. Jesus does say love your enemies, but that looks a little bit different than being friends with them. But one thing that I do know is if you pay attention to what we talk about tonight, it's a game changer. If you change the way you think about the people that you don't like, you think about the people who are outside of your group, it'll change who you are, and it'll change how you live your life. I know for me, like as soon as I was able to let go of of the stuff that happened with Zach, my life got so much less stressful and got so much easier. So again, our reasons for moving someone into the enemy category or the list of people that we don't like or whatever you want to call it, they're unique, they're extreme. Sometimes we have great reasons for them, and sometimes we don't. But what I do know is that we've probably never had enemies like Jesus has had enemies. If you take a look back, if you take a look back in the Gospels, you can see that Jesus' enemies, they weren't just kind of these people that he didn't like or people that he couldn't stand, but these were people that were literally trying to kill him. I hope that none of us have experienced enemies like that, unless you're in like witness protection program or something like that, and that's what you're doing at Ripple Effect tonight. Hopefully not. But Jesus had real enemies, and these were enemies that were literally trying to kill him. And not only were they trying to kill him, throughout the whole process of trying to kill him, they were beating him, they were torturing him, they were spitting on him. It was literally the worst thing that you can imagine. And I want to pause here for a moment because I grew up with a dad as a pastor, and kind of every time we talked about Jesus in Sunday school, right? Because I was always at Sunday school, and every time we talked about Jesus in Sunday school, we didn't really get that picture. We got this picture of Jesus that he was just like this happy, nice guy, long-haired, looked like a hippie, right? And he just loved everybody. But the truth is that Jesus went through crazy stuff. Jesus had real enemies, and sometimes it's hard to sometimes it's hard to realize that. And I know whenever you say that, you think like, well, of course, all of Jesus's interactions with his enemies were perfect. Like, he's Jesus. But one thing we don't always realize is not only was Jesus fully God, but he was also fully human. And what that means is that Jesus felt emotions just like we feel emotions. Jesus felt anger just like we feel anger. Jesus wanted to respond to his enemies and to the people who don't like him and to the people that were trying to kill him the same way that we want to respond to our enemies sometimes. He felt that temptation. He felt that pull towards responding to people the same way that you and I do. He wasn't like this emotionless robot, but he was a person. Right? And whenever we realized that he had a choice in this, right? He had more of whenever it came to him being tortured and killed and crucified by his enemies, he had a choice in it. He had a choice to how he reacted. And whenever we realized that, like, he had more of a choice than we do because he was God. He could have done anything. He could have came down and stopped it in that very instant. But whenever we realize that he made the choice to do something different, the choice becomes all that more powerful. So if you look in the Gospel of Luke, you kind of see what how Jesus reacts to his enemies. And it says that two other men, this is in Luke chapter 23, verse 32. And this is kind of whenever they're deciding whether or not they're going to crucify Jesus or what criminal they're going to punish. And it says that two other men, both were criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. See, whenever Jesus went to go be tried, he wasn't a proven criminal, but these two other guys were known. Everybody knew what they did. Everybody knew they were criminals. There wasn't a question about it. And in Luke chapter 23, verse 32, we read that two other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. And kind of what was going on here was that it was a holiday, and the Roman government was going to let one person go for this holiday, a known criminal. And they brought these three out. They brought Jesus and these two other criminals out. And they said, which one do you want us to let go? And the crowd picked someone who wasn't Jesus. And these two other criminals were known criminals. Where Jesus it was really up to question. So the punishment that Jesus was going through with his enemies was already unfair, and it makes the way he reacted that much more powerful. So they choose Jesus and they take him to this place called Golgotha. It literally means the skull, and this is where they're going to execute him. And in Luke chapter 23, we read this. It says, they came to the place called the skull, and they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. So whenever they decide to crucify Jesus and punish Jesus in the way they did, they had these two other criminals with him. So there he is. His friends abandoned him. Crowds turned against him. The religious leaders left him, right? And this whole situation was unfair, and it wasn't anything that he deserved. And what does he do? He could, and keep in mind, he's God, so he could do anything. But what does he do? He says this. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. In our culture, there's plenty of times where we hear stories about someone forgiving the other, but before this time, that never happened. It was an eye for an eye. It was never, Father, forgive them. It was, Father, get vengeance on them, right? And sometimes we do that same thing, but Jesus modeled this crazy way of responding to people who were his enemies. And he not only did he do it in life, but he did it in the middle of extreme unfair torture that he didn't even deserve. He did it whenever he was being executed. And what that does whenever we see Jesus say this is it teaches us about the heart of God and his heart towards humanity, even whenever we're at our worst. So what's that mean, right? What's that mean? If Jesus acted that way whenever it came to his enemies, like, what do you expect me to do? Like, be like Jesus? I know that's the goal, but holy cow, is it really that easy? No. And we know that, but let's go back to what Jesus did, right? To what he said. He said, Father, forgive them. The first thing that Jesus did whenever it came to his enemies is he prayed for them. And it wasn't like this prayer that me and you might want to pray sometimes. That's like, God, I hope you get them back. Or, dear God, I hope they realize how much of a punk they are, right? Like that I know those are the prayers I find myself saying sometimes, but it was more like, God, help me forgive them. He wasn't even saying, God, I forgive them. Just so you know, I forgive them. He was saying, Father, please forgive them. God, please help me forgive them. Put your forgiveness in my heart. In other words, Jesus was really saying, God, move my heart when it comes to people that I don't like. Change my heart whenever it comes to the people that I can't stand. Change my heart whenever it comes to insert name here. And this is such a big deal whenever it comes to the way we pray, because number one, we probably don't pray for our enemies at all. And if we do, it probably sounds a lot different than Father, forgive them, right? I know that I find myself doing the, God, I hope they realize how messed up they are. or God, I hope that you'll have vengeance in this life or the next, right? Or something crazy like that. But what Jesus does here is he doesn't say, God, I forgive them, or God, help them realize how bad they are. But he says, God, help me forgive them. God, move in my heart whenever it comes to people that I don't like. And this is a whole new thing, because it's not even like you have to love your enemies, and if you don't, you're not perfect, you're messed up, whatever. But it's actually, God, help me have the heart for these people that you have for them. God, help me forgive these people the way that you've forgiven them. And the other things that he says they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. And Jesus, he could have said a ton of stuff about these people who were punishing him, about these people who were killing him, about these people who were doing things to him that he didn't deserve. But what he chose to do was to see them with compassion. He didn't claim that what they were doing was right, or even that it was good, or even that it was okay, right? He knew it was wrong, but what he saw is something that we often don't notice as people. Jesus saw that what they were doing was coming from a place of brokenness. And maybe it was because of their past, maybe it was because of what they had been through, but maybe it was because of their hearts. But that is where that punishment and that anger was coming from for him. So that's something so important to consider whenever you're going through stuff, whenever you have these enemies, whenever you're coming up against these people that don't like you, or that treat you like crap, or whatever, is that they have a story. And 9 times out of 10, the person who's hurting you, the person who's doing you wrong, is probably coming out of a place of pain and coming out of a place of hurt. Right? And I think we've all been there before in one way or another, to where we're not okay. And because we're not okay, we treat other people bad. And whenever it comes to our enemies, sometimes it's so important to remember that they have a story, and that they're people too. And that oftentimes they're coming from a place of brokenness and a place of pain. And whenever we keep this in mind, right, and we can include this in our prayer as well, it's like, God, change my heart the way I see my enemies, and help me see where they're coming from. Help me see why they're doing this. Help me have the same heart for them that you do. And it's not this thing where you have to treat them like they're your best buds, they have to be your best friends or whatever. But whenever we can kind of flip the lens and we can see where they're coming from, we can start to have some compassion for them. We don't have to have this hatred towards them or have these arguments in our head or talk about them behind their back, but you can kind of understand them and have some empathy for them and treat them differently. And whenever we're able to do this, it changes everything. It changes who we are. It changes how we interact with our friends. It changes how we are with our group, right? And this can not just be a change for you, but whenever you make the change, it can change your whole squad. It can change your whole group of friends, because whenever you guys decide that the people you don't like, that the people that are on the outside, whenever you decide to treat them differently, it enables you to have compassion towards them. And that's what it's all about. So your situation might not be solved. It might not be fixed by taking this crazy approach to your enemies, but you can trust that God is working in it and God's moving in it and through you and around you and all of those things, despite the way that these people make you feel, because he's bigger, right? And he sees the bigger picture, and he sees what's going on, not just in our lives, but in their lives and in everybody around us. So before we end tonight, just remember that prayer. God, move in my heart when it comes to the people that I don't like. And your small group leaders have some great material for you guys to talk about, and just take some time in small group to really get honest and really get real about, the people you don't like. Unless they're in your small group, then keep it on the low, right? But to talk about the people that you might be frustrated with, or the people that you have a hard time with, or the people that maybe you need to forgive or ask forgiveness from. So thank you guys so much for being here tonight, listening. Have a great time in small group.